well, so I can post the recording of these notes if you want to listen to them over again at any point. I'll put them up on, I'll put the link to the video up on iLearn. And don't worry, the video is going to be unlisted, so people randomly on the internet are not going to find it. Okay. Okay. So for the last class for Tuesday, yes, Tuesday, I asked you to read What Happened When I Confronted My Cruelest Troll, and then also the article Studies Around Self-Disclosure in Social Media. So in response to that, I asked you to think about a scenario in which computer-mediated communication, right? So online communication went too far and had really negative, display negative behavior, negative consequences, or a situation in which it was really beneficial and something really positive happened. So what were some examples that you all thought of in your journal? So what are times that you have been online on social media of some sort and you've seen something go way too far in a negative direction, or you've seen it be really positive and supportive?
I have a recent example of when it worked the good way.
Okay.
I was going to this local print shop in my hometown, and they had really good business, and so I really wanted to display that. So we put that on a little community watch website, or a page on Facebook like that, and then it just got so much feedback, positive feedback, and then the owner found out about it, and he was just really happy about that. So it's a good way to support local business. It can be, at least.
Yeah, especially right now, right? So many local businesses are hurting. So finding a way to let them know that they're valued, but then also maybe hopefully drum up some sort of business for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. What were some other examples that you all thought of? Lisa, yeah?
You can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, so my daughter was doing a project for her school on immunizations.
Oh.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So she had one of those Survey Monkey things she posted, and it was just for a class, and the replies from people were so polarized. And then they started, publishing, saying, go here, go there. And it was really, really, some of these things, like my daughter's 13. Please clean up that language and this and that, because there was a part where she was just part of a project, and this was a school thing. And even on the San Carlos School website, it was blowing up with all kinds of inappropriate language.
Oh, by adults, right?
By adults. This is an elementary and middle school, a Catholic one.
Yeah.
And it was, it got really, really blown up, and a lot of parents got upset. The worst thing was we found out that some of the parents were the commenters.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
You might want to hide your email, you know what I mean?
So was their name attached to their comments?
Sometimes they were, yeah. And so they would, like using a face name or something. I'm like, I recognized one of them. I'm like, oh wow, I pick up her kid like once a week. I know who that is because I know when she comments on my face.
Yeah, it's interesting how it can snowball, right? Like when people see people having really strong views, they feel more emboldened to say stuff that they would not say in person, and to become very negative and vicious about it, especially around like vaccines. People have like really strong feelings about it. And will these communities of people online will kind of gang up and attack people if they kind of go against what they believe, especially some of the communities that are very anti-vaccine.
Right. And I just thought it was weird. It came to mind now just because of all we're having,
Yeah.
all the stuff with the virus and all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so I think it's going to also continue to like rear its head when a vaccine is developed for this, right?
And I have a positive one if you want that.
Oh, good. Yes, it would be nice to hear some positive stuff too.
So it's kind of out of an unfortunate event, but after the shooting in Gilroy,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the San Jose Sharks through their foundation, yes, I'm talking hockey again, but through their foundation had a Gilroy Strong event. They tried to raise $30,000
Wow.
from Sharks fans and interested parties, and it made over $335,000 to help the families of those who, you know, were grieving and everything, to do, you know, put up a scholarship for the kids and do other things. I'm not sure where all the money went,
Mm-hmm.
but in 24 hours, it really, really blew up the amount of people. They were hoping to get $30,000.
Wow.
It got really close to, like, they got over $250,000. They got, you know, a
That's
third of $1 million.
incredible.
And so many people, it was such a big outpouring. So many people, you know, from all over the world felt for, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that these people were just, you know, going to the garlic festival. And so I thought that was an amazing amount of love, and it turned into, you know, something you never see in sports where, you know, people were like, I'm a Pittsburgh Penguin fan, we hate them, and they were donating. And I thought that's, you know, a lot of love, and it went way out of the hockey community. So,
Yeah, so it can bring in people who would normally be opposed to one another, right? In a positive way. Yeah, and you know, that's interesting. That's what some of the studies said too. Like if people see positive behavior, they're more likely to replicate positive behavior. You know, great. That's a really great example. I don't know if you and your family saw, but I saw a post like yesterday, and it said, which San Jose Sharks team members would you want to be quarantined with?
I saw that.
Great.
Okay, Mosh.
So, okay, let's see. So let's talk about the piece about the study of anonymity and behavior, because it definitely relates to these. And if any of you have any thoughts or comments, please jump in. You may want to say it verbally because I'm looking at my notes and I may not be able to see you. Okay, so the study of anonymity and behavior, it started out by discussing a study that was conducted by Philip Zimbardo at Stanford. So if any of you are familiar with the Stanford prison experiment, Philip Zimbardo is the one who designed that experiment. And so this was another one that he did in which he took female students and he dressed them each differently, right? So the way that you dress really can influence the way you feel about your role. And so I know it's really hard, like as we're doing these online classes, but sometimes if you have like a presentation to do or whatnot, like dressing the part, like dressing like you feel like you're feeling, dressing professional, getting ready in that way helps, it primes your mind for the role that you're going to play. So in this, he had the female students either dress in lab coats, some had name tags, and their faces were visible. Some were given these like hoods that kind of covered their face so other people could not see them. And he asked them to give an electric shock to someone, right? They were not actually giving an electric shock, but they did not know this. And so he found that people who were hooded were twice as likely to say, yes, okay, I'll give this other person a shock, rather than people whose faces were not covered, right? And so they kind of felt that this was a link between anonymity and potentially bad behavior. Other studies have shown that people tend to act more aggressively or more rudely if they feel that they're identity is being concealed, right? So if you have a party, like they've done studies where people are put in social situations and they're wearing masks or costumes, right? So think about like Halloween or any kind of masked party. People tend to behave more outlandishly and take more risks, do things they would normally not do when they feel like their identity is cloaked, right? Or people who are into like costumes or cosplay or that kind of stuff, it kind of gives you an ability to step into another role, right? And so that can influence behavior. They also did say, though, even though it can take away people's inhibition so that they will act more rudely or illegally or aggressively, it can have the opposite effect, and it can have a positive effect, right? So it may offer people a chance to share things about themselves that they would not normally share face to face. By having some anonymity, they feel more emboldened to display really personal information and get affirmation from other people. Okay. So they found that overall, like anonymity can reveal personality traits that our face-to-face interactions would not, right? But kind of the most important predictor of that is kind of the norms of the group, right? So if the group that someone is a part of online or the like thread that they're a part of has kind of a positive slant to it, people will react more positively. If the norms of the group are for people to be more aggressive or negative, then that's going to snowball too, right? So have any of you seen any examples of this online? Either people like somebody will post something kind of negative and then everybody else kind of starts like posting a lot of really negative things, or if somebody posts something really positive that you see people tend to reflect that kind of positivity. Can anybody mention an example?
Hello?
Yes?
Oh, okay. I would say like a good example would be Twitter or social media like Facebook. It depends on like what the post would be, but you tend to mirror with your comments basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and like Twitter is one space where things tend to kind of, not always, but often get very negative, right? Somebody says something and someone jumps on it and then everybody else is like, yeah, I'm going to jump on it too, right? And I, thinking of the presentations that you all did kind of at the beginning of the semester about celebrity feuds, right? If somebody has a large group of very dedicated followers, if one of them notices somebody who does something that they feel that they want to kind of defend their celebrity against, they'll start attacking, and then everybody else will start doing it too, right? And that can happen very quickly. I don't know if any of you like follow the Kardashians, but a few of you had like presented on them. I think the sisters got into some big fight recently on their show, and Kourtney said she doesn't want to be on the show anymore because she wants to step back and spend more time with her children. And people did not react very positively to that, right? You had a lot of followers of like Kim Kardashian who kind of really attacked her for that very viciously, right? And I mean, for me, I would say, yeah, that's a really positive thing. You should spend time with your kids. But they became very defensive very quickly. Yes.
Hold on, let me unmute.
Are you there? Oh, wait, you were actually unmuted. Hold on.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. So it just made me think about that whole Meghan and Harry thing.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's been really, I was at the supermarket, trying to check out, keeping my social distance. But, you can't help but look at those magazines. And at my age, half the people on them I don't know anymore. Like, who is that? But I know who they are. And, there's just a lot of, so had the time, looked it up, and a lot of hate towards her, like unbelievable amount of hate. I'm thinking,
Yes.
she just didn't want the pressure of that lifestyle. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, I don't know what you guys think, but I think it's totally understandable. Like, who would want to go through that pressure? And honestly, like in England, especially being a colonial power, there's a lot of racism, a lot. And if you look at the way that the British media would criticize and attack her for things that just are so trivial, right? Like how she dressed or how she looked at somebody or what, it was really overblown. And I think a lot of that had to do with race, and they're not really recognizing that. So of course I would want to leave. I mean, and it's a lot of hatred towards Americans.
Oh yeah. Everything she wore, everything she did, every move she made, poor thing, you had to feel sorry for her. She must really love that guy to go through that shit.
My God. Yeah. I mean, there's even like them being all the way over here, they're not going to be able to escape all of it. So how do they deal with that kind of really negative attacks and pressure? Their poor child too. So, yes. And actually my dad was born in England, the end of World War II, and his family had to leave because there was so much anti-American sentiment. Women who dated or married like American soldiers were seen as traitors. So that still exists now. Okay, so in thinking about these examples, again, in the article, they talked about the ways in which crowds can kind of jeer people on, and they talked about people who had taken suicide attempts, and if it was in the dark and there was a large crowd of people who kind of felt like their identity was not super visible, or would be more likely to cheer somebody on to take really negative action, right? And I thought about the recent cases in which several women were prosecuted and then sentenced for encouraging their boyfriends to kill themselves, right? And so I think the kind of the anonymity of like texting, they kind of thought, they really like pressured them in a way that is kind of incredible, right? They also, in the article, mentioned 4chan chat rooms where a lot of really negative trolling behavior, I mean, really incredibly negative trolling behavior has happened. And that's part of these group norms, right? So that has kind of this like bad group norm. And so in 4chan, it's encouraged, right? People are encouraged to do really negative things. So what they mentioned in the article was this potential solution is for people to challenge those toxic group norms. And rather than going along with them saying, hey, you know what? This isn't all right. Now in some very strong groups with very strong group identity, they probably would attack somebody for that, but I think it's worth disrupting those norms. But that's for the individual. I'm not asking you all to go out and do that, but just kind of think about that. What is a way to kind of change the norm? Or if some of you are on social media right now, I know a lot of people have been posting positive things as a way to kind of counteract all of the really scary news out there. And they are maybe post something with a color from your camera feed, or something kind of like positive. In online, I'm on several like cooking groups and like a sourdough bread baking group. That's been really fun because people are really positive and supportive, and you post something and you're like, wow, that's great. Oh, that's wonderful. I want your recipe, right? So it's fun to just read those and see people kind of being positive with one another, right? And positive in terms of creative outlets. Okay, now, interestingly too, in the study, it said that when individuals online had to make eye contact with one another, they were much less likely to engage in negative behavior, because I think they felt more responsible to the other person and they're more aware of their nonverbal cues. Okay, so if there's a way for people to see each other like eye to eye online, if they're doing gaming or engaging in discussion, it can help hold them more accountable to positive behaviors. And positive positive behavior can have a positive spiral effect. So if somebody does something positive, people are more likely to emulate that. And so that can lead to good things, right? So think about how that can lead to like really good positive things. Is there something else I wanted to add? I can't. Oh, okay. So that did make me think about your your communication activity plan is due tonight by midnight. So just a reminder, if you have not done it yet, please do it. Okay, the guidelines for that are up on iLearn, and I also posted an example. So if you want to look at how that could be described, it's there. Do you guys want me to show it to you? Yes? Okay, let me see if I can pull it up. Can I share my screen here? Share screen. Okay, can you guys see this? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So this is an example that I posted on iLearn. So under this week, under communication activity plan guidelines, there's a sample. So with this sample, I just kind of gave a description, a little introduction, right? Double space in terms of what I'm thinking this activity could help people do, right? So with this, it's kind of a play on charades in a way. And so people would be placed into groups, say a group of like 10 people, and they would brainstorm scenarios in which somebody would show really strong nonverbal cues. And so they would each take a turn and somebody would act out that scenario, not using words, but using nonverbals or even sounds is fine. So like if they were waiting for somebody who's late for a meeting, they're not going to explain that, but they're just going to come up and be like, right? And so like really exaggerating that kind of behavior. And so the people in their team would make note of all of the nonverbal cues that they're noticing. So like I'm sighing, like I'm looking at my watch repeatedly, I'm looking up, I'm looking, you know, kind of like pacing and like huffing my shoulders. So they would know all of those, and then they would, as a group, talk about what they would list out what they observed and what they think that means, right? And it would be a good way for a group to talk about what nonverbal cues mean and to practice that. So then I go on and I describe the activity itself. So I give several different steps that the group would follow. So you want to kind of break these steps down as small as you can, maybe even smaller than how I broke it down here. Okay. Just so if somebody's leading this activity, they could read these and understand what they're supposed to do. I gave some examples of nonverbal behaviors, and then how the group could come together and discuss them afterwards and discuss what they'd noticed. And then I offer a conclusion in terms of summarizing again what I hope people will get out of this activity. And then I list some potential challenges. So what are things that might come up that could get in the way of this going well, right? So maybe a group might focus on negative scenarios too much, right? So how can the facilitator encourage them to also think about positive things? So maybe somebody's really excited, like they just got surprised at their birthday or whatever. So what are nonverbal cues they would show there? Maybe students may not take the assignment seriously. So how could you deal with that? Or if groups get into disagreement, or if there's somebody who kind of takes charge too much in the group and you want everybody to kind of engage equally. So how do you do that, right? So these are just an example. Okay, so you can feel free to take a look at this. Do y'all have any questions around that? No. Okay, so like I mentioned before, you can, oh yes, question?
Okay, I do have a question. I'm kind of confused about how I could make this activity plan my own and like how I can make it my own example. I can't really think of any ideas that could really You know,
Well,
I
I
don't know.
would suggest if you're kind of having trouble thinking of ideas.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So what I would suggest is do a general like Google search for icebreaker activities.
Okay.
Those tend to be really good in terms of practicing nonverbal recognition.
Mhm.
Or you could even just type in nonverbal cue activities, see what comes up. And I don't want you to copy what's online, but see, like read through what's out there and be like, huh, that gives me an interesting idea. How could I change this, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So like a lot of times, if any of you end up teaching, you may do that, right? You kind of look online, you're like, what kind of exercises go along with this idea that I have? You find something that's kind of like it, and then you end up tweaking it to make it work for you, right? So think about that here. You don't have to just come up with something completely new, right? So use something that's out there and modify it, but I do want you to modify it.
Mm.
Okay. Let me see if I can find my notes again. Where did I put them? Okay, so we're going to talk about group dynamics because these like online groups very much reflect how groups function, and groups are a really important part of how society organizes itself. And again, I'll put these notes up on iLearn, but just try to take in what you can here. And if you have any thoughts, please jump in, verbally tell me if I don't see you waving. Okay, so group dynamics really influence the interpersonal communication process, right? The tendency for human beings to join in groups is maybe kind of the most important characteristic that we have, because it really influences how we see the world, how we behave, how we interact with others. This group identity is kind of foundational to who we are as people. And most of us are part of multiple groups. So we'll look at how groups are kind of put together, because there's what, like 6 billion people in the world, probably more now. There could be that many groups, right? We're all part of multiple groups. So human beings, like, and there's very few people who like to go off into the woods and live completely on their own. Majority of people need some sort of human connection, human interaction. You're probably finding that, especially now, like even if you're somebody who's kind of introverted, being separate from people is very challenging. I'm sure you're all finding. Yeah. So most of the activities in our life, maybe where we work, where we learn and study, where we worship, or what we do in our spare time, kind of tends to happen in groups, right? And so all of these groups like have some sort of connection that link individuals together. And so within the groups, like, and I think I have this definition up on the document that I'm going to show you. But if we wanted to define a group would be 2 or more individuals who are connected to one another, either by their social relationships, their location or circumstance, their mutual influence, so how they influence one another, or how they kind of perceive themselves. What's a person's perception of their own personal identity? And maybe people who are part of the same social category will link up together to kind of ally with one another, and that will create a group. And so groups are social systems that involve regular interaction among their members and some sort of shared identity, something that kind of is tying them together. Okay. So groups tend to have this like sense of we-ness, right? Us, that kind of enables them to feel like they belong to this identity and belong to one another in some way. And this can be really tight, right? Really tightly bound connections, or these can be kind of loose. So why are groups important? So there's 4 kind of main reasons in my notes in terms of why groups are important. 1, they really impact individual behavior and well-being, right? So who we tend to spend our time with can influence our own behavior, either in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way. So we kind of tend to reflect the behaviors of our friends or our family, our kind of closest identifying groups. So friends who kind of tend to show positive behaviors, maybe exercising regularly, will just that behavior will encourage others within that group to do the same thing. People who eat in a healthy manner, that will encourage other people in that group to, like, they're maybe unconsciously influenced to do those same behaviors. Conversely, too, if people in a group maybe use tobacco or use other substances, right? People within that group will tend to be more likely to do that. Or like people's weight tends to kind of be reflective of their group. So if there's a group who maybe is more sedentary or who does not eat as healthy, people within that friendship group will tend to usually have a lot of those behaviors, but vice versa. Like if people in that group have good, positive, healthy behaviors, other people will be more encouraged to do so, right? So it really does affect well-being. Second, it influences how we connect with larger society, right? So as part of our identity, how we see ourselves fitting into the larger society and how we feel that people within our group see the larger society, right? So the way they relate to and talk about that will influence how we think about it. Third, it influences how we make decisions, right? So what we see as being right or wrong, our norms or morals are very much influenced by that, or what we think people in the group will, how they will judge our choices. So if we think somebody within the group is going to judge a choice that we make negatively, we're less likely to do that. Or we may feel more conflicted feelings about it. If we feel like it's something that they will support, we're more likely to do it. And then fourth, they influence and shape society. So this is a really important thing because the way our group holds opinions influences how we hold opinions. The way that the group votes can influence how we vote, what candidates we support, what policies we support, which ones we don't. A lot of that is influenced by a group that we feel we are a part of, okay? So let me show you an image on how groups tend to be organized. Oh, I have to share my screen. Hold on. Okay, hopefully you can see this. So here in the image, it kind of shows the way that groups can be kind of composed. So you have the larger community, right, which we're all kind of members of. And then you have these like sub-organizations. And so an organization could be some smaller communities. So like a larger community could be maybe the United States. And then a smaller subset of organization could be like state of California or the Central Coast or whatever it might be, right? It could be a school, right? So CSUMB could be one of these organizations. So we're kind of part of that larger group. Within that, then there's these subgroups, right? So say if we're looking at CSUMB as kind of our organization, a group may be a club that you're part of on campus, or a sport that you play in a team that you're on. It could also be maybe your major, right? If you're an HCOM major, that could be a group, right? And then from those groups, it's made up, they're all each made up of individual members. And with the individual members in that group usually kind of tend to form pairs or triads, right? Where you find somebody within the group that you really like get along with, that you share something with, that you kind of feel like, okay, they get me more than other people do. And so there can actually be these like subgroups within the larger groups. Yeah, so, and individual members can be part of one group and then part of another group, right? So this is all kind of this web working together. And I'll post these up on iLearn for you. Okay, let me get back to where I'm at. Okay, so like I mentioned, people behave differently when they're in a group than if they were alone, right? Whatever the norms of the group are can influence how they behave. So if the norms of the group are for people to be very outspoken, individuals in that group will be more outspoken. If the norms of the group are to kind of follow whoever the leader is and maybe be obedient to them, then the group will tend to kind of go in that direction. Not everybody will go along with it, but a lot of times they will, because these groups, these collections do change their members. I also think about cults, which I think is kind of really fascinating in a lot of ways. So with cults, you have a charismatic leader in the group, and what tends to happen is people who remain in the group will go along with whatever that cult leader does, right? And that can lead to really kind of shocking consequences. But it becomes a norm within that group, and that kind of concentrates power within that leader, right? Okay, so people like in groups can be related by maybe the tasks that they need to carry out, or some sort of other like social connection. So you can think of members of a family who live in the same household as a group, right? So they're linked by responsibilities, joint responsibilities that they share, maybe tasks that they have to carry out. They share a living space. There's generally strong emotional bonds, even if there's tension, right? Even if there's conflict within the family, there's some sort of emotional bond connecting people. And even like genetic similarities or other biological connections, right? People who work together are linked by their collaborative tasks that they must complete. So like if you are in a workplace, that you have some sort of shared goal that you have as a group, maybe like if you work at a nonprofit, whatever the goal of the nonprofit is, or if you work in retail, right, your goal is to facilitate customers and buying products, right? So you and your coworkers are all working towards kind of making that happen. And so then within that group, you're going to form like these smaller groups of friendships or allies. And those can then kind of like break off. So I don't know if any of you, I'm sure you've all experienced this, but if anybody could mention, if you in a workplace have been part of one group and that small subgroup really hates the other group at work. You all are working together, but if you want to be with the cool kids, you got to be in this group, and you have to hate and be against those other people. I see some people like, Can anybody talk about an experience they had like that?
I could kind of relate with these kids who are athletes or not.
Oh,
Yeah, I feel like I experienced that in high school because I would be really athletic, and there's other kids who are just really into school, and it wouldn't just go with them. Like it would just be like, I feel like sometimes they would get bullied, or it would just be like really immature. Now that I think about it.
yeah, you know, and at that time, like in high school, all of these cliques seem so important, right? It's like, well, I really identify with this clique, and I want to do what they are going to approve of, and I can't be a friend with this person because they're in a different clique, right? And that's, for some reason, those groups are really part of your identity in high school. But as you get older, like, they don't really matter that much, right?
Yeah.
But that can extend into the workplace, though. Oh, yes, Lisa?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have one. When I was first working in high tech, salaries were pretty pretty good to start with, considering, you know, what the mean salary was. But then as production ramped up, the company I was working for hired a lot of part-timers and a lot of people who were not under the same contract as we were.
Oh.
And it's kind of like the adjunct or, you know, tenure type of a
Yeah.
thing,
Mm-hmm.
where they wanted the same benefits that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of made it an us against them, because what the company did is said, oh, well, we can do this, but we've got to get these guys to agree, as in the ones who'd been there longer, to take like a different health plan, to go from a PPO to an HMO and do these type of things.
But then it could turn employees against one another.
Exactly. And I, you know, you can't help but feel bad. You know, you're doing the same job as someone else might be at the time. Maybe I'm getting 26 an hour or salaried, and they're getting, you know, whatever the temp agency is paying them, and they're not getting benefits. And it made it for a real, like, you know, then the company turned it around, like, we want to hire a lot of those people at the lower rate.
Of course.
You know, it's like, oh, shit, no.
So you could save money. Yeah. I mean, that's what the universities do, right? They hire us as lecturers because if you don't teach a certain amount of units, you don't get benefits. You don't have a lot of protection, and they pay us like a third of what they pay tenure track or tenured professors, right? A third or a quarter of that. So you're doing the same job, but you're treated very differently, and like you don't have rights in terms of decision making, right? You're not allowed in a lot of meetings. You don't get voting rights. It's kind of crazy. But so they use it, but what they do is they turn workers against one another, right? So it's saying, well, it's not us saying you can't have it, it's your coworkers who are saying you can't have those benefits. So then it makes people kind of mad at each other, and then they do that so then they don't have to give benefits to people, right? So be careful about how your employers manipulate groups, right? Where am I at? Oh, okay. Oh, and so groups can also be connected by really loose situational connections. So if any of you have to go out to stores right now, people who are standing in line at a checkout, right, could be considered to be part of a group because you're there for a particular reason. Or if you've gone to concerts, right, you all are there at that moment because you want to share that experience of that concert. But you're briefly connected to these people in some way. And so these situations demand some sort of kind of group norm cooperation, right? What kind of behavior is expected? So if you're in line, especially right now, like say if you're in line at Costco or something, now the norms are supposed to be that you're, you know, minimum 6 feet apart from one another, and that you're supposed to be patient enough to wait in that line. People are under a lot of stress, so they're not behaving as they normally would be right now. I'm sure if any of you are working in retail or working in any of these stores that you're noticing that people are behaving very differently. But there are some kind of temporary norms that happen within these short-lived groups. So let's see, groups can be divided, like subdivided, or even be kind of exist between like what's called a dyad. So that would be 2 people, dyad, or a triad, which would have 3 members. Okay, so those can be very small groups, or they're very large groups or collections of people. So people in a crowd, maybe at a rally, or congregations at a church. Or people who are in some sort of protest, right? So that's a large group of people. But most groups kind of tend to be kind of smaller in size. The larger the groups get, the more complex and structured they become, generally. The groups are, individuals in the group are networks, so they're connected to one another in some way. I kind of talked about that. Okay, and so also there's a difference between a group and a category. So a category is kind of like people who share some sort of certain quality. So a category could be maybe people who are like introverted. So people who are introverted may not necessarily be part of a group because they're not connected or identifying with one another, even though they share that in common. But if you get a group of people online who say, hey, we're all introverts, let's talk, that's a group, okay? So if they find that they share something categorically in common and then like make an alliance with one another, that becomes a group. So groups then could be defined by primary or secondary, right? So a primary group, this is your closest group. This is closest to your own identity. So primary group would be your family, your biological family or your adoptive family, or your very closest friends, right? So if your family is not a group that you can safely identify with or that you need to leave, people have what could be considered a chosen family, right? You form really close friendships and they kind of substitute for that, right? So either of these are really close to how we identify ourselves. So these small long-term groups, usually there's more face-to-face interaction or more individual interaction, maybe on the phone or virtually or whatever. There's a lot of cohesiveness generally. People really identify closely with one another. And usually we become part of these groups involuntarily. So a lot of times you're born into your family, right? If you are born into a family, you also like their cultural norms become part of what you do because that's part of like what you're around, right? So if your family has a religious practice and they go to a certain church, like you're going to be born into doing that, or other cultural holidays or whatnot. Now, if you have close friends who kind of substitute for that, that's more of you choosing to be part of it, but you kind of become influenced by what that group does. Generally, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, these primary groups are thought to protect their members from harm. So these are people you feel like if something bad happens, you can rely on them to help you, right? So they may help you if you get sick. If you need a place to stay, hopefully they'll give you a place to stay. They want to kind of like help you to get by. Okay, so think about these groups that you would rely on to help you to get by. That's your primary group. Then we have secondary groups. So you have your primary identifying group, and then these secondary groups are the other groups outside of that. So these are generally larger groups. They tend to last for a shorter period of time. Maybe there's not as much emotional connection involved, but there's some sort of other like reason why these groups are together. And they still do influence how the individual kind of fits into society, right? But they're not as like closely tied to who the person sees themselves as being, okay? So I'd like you to take a minute to think about which groups you belong to, right? So this may have to do with cultural practices, communities that you're a part of, some sort of groups that you've either joined voluntarily or involuntarily. So take a minute and then we'll talk about what some of these might be. So what are some of the groups that you feel like you're a part of if you would kind of make a little list in your head?
One of the groups I'm a part of, I guess involuntarily, it was my roommates I lived with at school. I thought of that.
They're assigned to you.
Yeah, and luckily we all liked each other, so it was a good group. I also was like in tennis in my community, so I was part of that community. I have a big blended family of siblings, so I don't know if that could be one. Like I'm a child of 7, so that could be a group, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, a sibling group like that. Yeah.
Oh, moms who carpool.
Ah, yeah, absolutely.
That's, yeah, we talk a lot. We're not doing it obviously right now, but
Yeah. Yeah,
Sure.
because you see each other at the same time, right? The same place. Yeah, and so that can be what's called an emergent group. Like you run into the same people doing this similar things, and you're like, hey, you have to do this too. And then you start talking with them, right?
exactly. And
Yeah.
then you rotate the kids, and then they all want to talk to you about where their kids have to go on the day that you are, cursed with having to pick all the kids up.
So you can get roped into doing things, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like if any of you tend to exercise, like maybe you walk on a trail at a certain time and you run into people when you're there and you're like, oh, hey, you happen to be there at the same time too, or like at the gym or whatnot, right? So those are groups too. Yeah. Let's see. So yeah, so that actually leads into thinking about how the groups come together. So either there are planned groups. So with planned groups, people deliberately come together. Either they decide to join that group themselves or some external force will come in and plan it for them. So like your roommates, right? The university picking them for you. That's a planned group. And then emergent groups are the ones that kind of spontaneously come together. Those are the ones you kind of just discover by accident, maybe. And maybe people have some sort of shared interest, and then they're like, hey, we should talk to somebody else who has that shared interest. And then that group kind of emerges from it. So like I have a small group of friends who started doing sourdough baking a couple months ago before all this happened. And then we just started messaging each other about it. And then it's become kind of this regular thing, right? And this is like a friend group, but this is like a smaller subset of that friend group, right? So I'm sure a lot of you have like done similar things like that. Let's see. Oh, okay, so then I wanted to talk about, and this is the final thing I'm gonna like go on about groups because I know I've been talking about them a lot. So group members, like when they interact, may discuss things, they may make decisions, they may express emotions, they might argue. It could take on a lot of different communicative forms. But usually like the groups interact around like two things. It could be task interaction. So these are group members who have a goal or have something that they have to carry out. So if you are assigned to a group for like a final research project, your task is to carry out that research. Or if you're on a panel or a group that has to make a policy decision or has to recommend something, your goal is to make sure that that happens. Okay, that is your task. So you have to coordinate your skills to make that decision or to carry that thing out. There's also relationship interaction. So with relationship interaction, this is where the actions of the group members kind of influence emotional or interpersonal bonds. So these could be positive social support, empathy, that kind of thing, right? Just being there for somebody else. They could also be kind of negative actions. Maybe it could be criticism, somebody being kind of hard on you, right? So they're not necessarily going to help the group complete a task, but they help sustain these emotional bonds between each other, right? So, I'm sure you all have, like your closest friends actually tend to be the ones who are hardest on you because they know you well, and then they know that you're not going to just abandon them necessarily if they say something to you that's not easy to take. So they'll be like, hey, so did you notice you're doing this, right? If somebody's not that close to you, they can't share that kind of information, but somebody who's closer to you is usually going to be tougher on you. And like your friends who are tougher on you actually tend to be the ones who want the best for you, but it just comes out as them being really tough. But it's actually a good thing. I know it's hard to take in, but okay, so let me show you another image. I'm going to explain this. Okay, so in terms of this image, these are kind of the different steps that groups go through when they're carrying out a task. Where are my notes? Oh, okay. Also, groups have different roles. So members within that group have a role that they're going to play. Either they're a leader within the group, they're a member of the group, they're a supportive member of the group, or different ways that they tend to kind of speak to one another, interact with one another. There's whatever is accepted as the norm within that group. The norms are kind of what action or behavior is approved by the group, what the group tends to sanction or not. And then the goal is the task that the group is going to carry out. Okay, can you see my notes? Okay, so the steps that the groups take are first forming. So forming is where the group comes together, right? You have all these individuals and then they are given a task and they have to form this group. So this is where the group generates, right? Maybe they're given an assignment or everybody is really passionate about a political cause and they want to kind of organize some sort of action around that. That's where the forming happens. Now, storming is a really interesting stage. This is where the group kind of forms these little subgroups of dyads and triads. This is where leaders kind of jockey for position. So within any group, you're going to have people who kind of want to take charge, people who want to kind of be in the background. You may have several people who want to take charge and they start clashing with one another, right? Trying to kind of determine their like pecking order. I think of the storming phase. Did any of you grow up on like a farm or with animals?
Yeah, kind of.
Yes? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you have, what kind of animals were on this, where you grew up?
We mainly just had chickens.
Okay. So this is a perfect example. I was thinking of chickens. Good. So
Is it-
tell me, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, are you talking about like the pecking order?
Exactly. So did you notice the chickens that you had engaging in pecking order?
Yeah. They'd also try to peck me too, but yeah.
Yeah, so the chickens are kind of always in this like storming phase, right? They're trying to say, hey, I'm the head chicken here, right? I'm in charge. And so if they see a weakness in another chicken, or if they see another chicken that is also has a strong personality, they'll start to attack them, right?
Yes, that is true.
Yeah, so they'll like start like flying at them, attacking them with their feet. They will peck at them, and if they peck at them and they find a weakness and like draw blood, chickens, if they see something red, if they see blood, they will peck more, and then they'll like peck, 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 and I've seen them even peck other chickens to death, right? Because they're like, I want to show that I'm in charge, right? So this is a survival mechanism. And so they need to be kind of the head chicken. And so like even for you, Joshua, if you go into like the pen with the chickens, they'll like try to scare you out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, some of the really dominant ones. So that's kind of them storming, right? It's who's trying to be in charge. Or if any of you have ever like been around goats or raised goats, they do the same thing. They want to be like in the highest up, and so they'll jump on top of one another, right? So it's whoever wants to be literally the highest kind of has the most authority. So that's the storming phase. Then we also have the norming phase. So this is where things kind of settle down. People's roles have kind of played out. And so this is where the group kind of gets into a groove. And not that groups always work really that well, right? But they're kind of like, okay, this is how we're going to function. They're kind of, whatever people's expected roles are now established, right? And then we have the performing phase. So in the performing phase, that's where everybody now is working towards getting this task done. Okay, so these different steps can kind of happen kind of quickly, or they can happen over a long period of time. But the performing is where they're actually making the decision, they're carrying out this task, this thing that needs to happen is going to happen, right? And then after that task is carried out, or if they're trying to have the task happen and it doesn't, there's a failure, whatever may happen, right? This is where it's going to come together. And then the adjourning is after, right? So now the group is done. They have completed what they need to complete. And they're like, okay, we're going to all go our separate way, right? Now, if any of the groups have a lot of problems, say in the storming phase, or in the norming phase, or in the performing phase, they may just say, forget it, right? And just break apart before then. But hopefully they get to the point where they carry out the task and then they adjourn and then everybody's, you know, done. Now that can also, it could either be a sense of relief, like, oh, we're done, I don't have to worry about these other people anymore, or it can be kind of stressful, right? So like for right now, for a lot of you having to leave campus, having to be away from people that you're normally in a group with, there can be kind of a sense of mourning around that, right? You know, I know I went through like a big sense of mourning about not having physical classes with all of you. So definitely being separate like can lead to a lot of different feelings. Okay, those are the end of my notes for this. Do any of you have any questions around that?
I actually do have a question.
Sure.
So about grouping, is it possible that you don't need grouping? What about the people that, you know, that they feel that they can work by themselves and be like a loner in a sense? Would that affect them in the long run? Is it better to have grouping or?
We're human beings, you know, it's kind of part inherent in who we are. So even people who don't want to be part of a group are usually part of some sort of group. So either their family group or their close friendship group, even if they don't get along with those people, they're somehow part of that or connected in some way, or they may be in some other group that maybe, oh, I hate people, and everybody else in that group is like, I hate people too. Let's talk about how much we hate people. Guess what? That's a group, right? So like people like have these groups online where they like to complain about things or complain about human beings. That's a group, right? Unless it's somebody who completely cuts himself off and like goes into the woods and lives alone. Generally people are part of some group, even if they don't want to recognize that. Any other questions? Okay, so I will post notes up on iLearn for you to go over this. So make sure to do your communication activity plan. Let me look online to see what else is coming up for us. Oh, okay, so for next, so do your communication activity plan, post that up on iLearn. And then for next week, I will post up another recorded lesson plan for Tuesday. So we'll be talking about empathic listening, which I think will be really important for you to practice right now. And also a little bit about groupthink. So what can happen when a group goes along with a decision that is not a good decision. And then we will have our Zoom meeting after that. Yeah, so I hope you all enjoy doing your communication activity plan. Be creative with it, have fun. Remember, you can do a game, like anything you want, okay? And if you have questions, feel free to message me. But I hope you all are doing okay. Please get rest if you need it. So, okay, I look forward to speaking with you all soon. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.